for Region 1 and a member of the delegate. Sorry, I just got that it was being recorded. Um, I'll start over. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is, and welcome to the Parliamentarian Overview Forum. My name is Darcy Wing, Director for Region 1 and member of the Delegate Assembly Task Force. This forum is being recorded. Should you have any questions, please either raise your hand or enter them in the chat or Q&A. Now I'd like to introduce our registered parliamentarian, Lucy Johnson. Take it away, Lucy.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Darcy, and good afternoon. I hope this to be kind of an informal, and please feel free to ask questions as we go along. Some of it can be review, some of it's new. So the question is, why have rules of order? Our objectives today are going to discuss why we have rules, governing documents. What are your governing documents? What is the purpose of the Roberts Rules of Order newly revised? The role of the chair, and most importantly today is the role of delegates. And we're going to just kind of briefly go through some of the Delegate Assembly standing rules, and especially those that talk about debate. So why have rules? You know, we have rules for life. They're pretty kind of self-explanatory. So why not have rules for meetings? Perhaps you've been to a meeting like that where you feel like you're like the person in the middle, and that just isn't really a very pleasant and or efficient, effective way of doing it. So what if you don't have rules? So if you have no standard rules, then really what Roberts discuss is they define this term called deliberative assembly, and that is one which meets to consider and decide on actions to be taken. So if you have no standard rules, you really need to decide and set the rules each time that you meet. I was actually at a world meeting in May over in Italy. It was pretty exciting. But as you can imagine, the rest of the world does not have Robert's rules. And so there really were no rules. The organization I was meeting with, it was a 3-day business meeting. And every day we had to reestablish the rules and vote. And it was become, honestly, my opinion, a little frustrating, but it really was not very efficient or productive. And that's really what General Robert experienced back in the 1800s. And so he came across the book of Robert's Rules. We'll talk a little more about that in a minute. But we have rules that govern all organizations. So you have your laws and the federal and state laws to customs and traditions. And in between, we have what we call governing documents. And these are a little more specific for every organization. So you're not really going to be able to do much to affect the federal and state laws, at least at the end of this month. You can make recommendations. And customs and traditions are great, but if people don't remember exactly what you used to do, kind of in between, it gets a little harder. So we need to have some governing documents. The first is a legal, your charter. Your next is your constitution, your bylaws, your standing rules. And then you adopt a parliamentary authority. And that's basically a parliamentary authority is a book of rules that covers other rules that you can't really cover in your governing documents. Sometimes you just don't think of everything, or nor do you really want to write them all down. So you just refer to those. And your organization has adopted Robert's Rules of Order as your parliamentary authority. So it's the big book, which is the one on the right, the white book. It's about 600 and some pages, and it's in its 12th edition. The other book that I have here pictured as a reference is Robert's Rules of Order in brief. It is not considered a parliamentary authority, but more the Cliff Notes or Parliamentary Procedure for Dummies, or whatever you want to call it. It's very easy to read. Probably takes you about 45 minutes to get a lot of the basics done. And it's written by the same authors, if you notice, the same. Actually, I was very privileged today to be in a meeting earlier this morning with Thomas Balch, who is one of the authors on this book, both of the books. And it made me change my PowerPoint. So I came home and it changed a couple things right away. So he was very inspiring, but that's a side note. So these rules go back to the 1800s. So what are the purpose? The purpose of rules of order are mostly to have fair and efficient meetings. And I think today all of you can agree that post-pandemic or with the pandemic, we have had more than our share of meetings. And and it's frustrating when you're in a meeting and it's just not efficient. It goes on and on and on. So how do we have those fair and efficient meetings? One of the big issues is civil discourse, and that's really where you listen to each other. Involves listening to each other, being respectful with debate. You have ground rules, or in our case, we're going to have some standing rules and good communication. You also have members have rights, and you have the right that your voice is heard. So members' rights and voices are heard. But you also have the right of the purpose of rules is to protect the rights of minority and absentee. And we'll talk a little more about that, but that's basically your quorum. And in the end, the majority rules. So the minority have a voice, the majority have a voice, members have voice, the absentee needs to be protected. And in the end, it comes down to what the group wants. There's three things we're just going to talk a lot about, not a lot about it, but this is kind of the jargon of parliamentary procedure that is pretty much key to having a fair and efficient meeting. And the three terms we'll talk about are precedence, germane, and dilatory. And precedence basically refers to the order in which motions are considered. And germane means that it's relevant to the subject that's under consideration. And the last is dilatory. And Roberts actually defines dilatory as intended to cause delay. So Robert's rules recognizes a motion as dilatory if it seeks to obstruct the will of the assembly. And this is where the chair has the responsibility to prevent members from obstructing business by either not recognizing them or ruling their motions are out of order. We'll talk a little more about this. So I want to just review one more time what the 9 basic principles of parliamentary procedures are. These are not necessarily for your organization, but just in general. So for example, one question at a time. You might have amendments, but we'll be looking at how we handle those. You have one question at a time, one member, one vote. And the asterisk is there is that there are some exceptions to all the rules, but for the most part, one member, one vote, and only members present can vote. Again, another little asterisk, because there are some that allow proxy voting. That's not this organization, but these are the basic principles in general. Majority rules, but the minority have rights, the members have rights, and the absentee have rights. And that's why you need a quorum. You can't call a meeting and just have a few people show up and pass rules. You need to at least guard against that, and that's by having a quorum, a number of which is important. You can also change action previously decided on. You might have received new information or things have changed. And, one of the things like that we can see that's changed is you never could have electronic meetings before. Well, the pandemic definitely changed that. You can follow your organization's own specific rules. And that's where, for example, your Delegate Assembly standing rules come into play. So now we're going to switch and talk a little about the role of the chair. So the chair has the right and responsibility to keep order in the assembly. It goes kind of without saying that the chair is well versed with the organization's rules, but they also need to know some of the principles of parliamentary procedure. They need to be familiar with RONR, or at least the Roberts Rules of Brief. And they need to know how to process business fairly, orderly, and efficiently. They can use a parliamentarian like myself. They can have reference sheets, and probably the best thing is to practice with this. They can also have scripts. We don't expect anyone to just know this on their top of their head. So you can have scripts written up, and that's really the best, is to have things written out when you say it. The second part is to run an efficient meeting. So they need to recognize the speakers and alternating pro and con. They need to, as I mentioned, kind of have that orderly system, which means they need to know what the precedence is, and if it's germane, if it's going to apply, and if a person's being dilatory. And if they are, they need to call them out of order. They need to say, that motion is not in order, or that amendment is not germane to the motion, or the member is being dilatory and they are not being in order. Sometimes as Minnesota nice, we don't always like to do that, but it really helps make an efficient meeting. And that's what the bottom line that we're here is: we want to get business done. You're coming together, you're giving up your time, but you really want to accomplish something. And the last part of a role of a chair is to assist the delegates to accomplish business. The chair is there to help. So if you're not quite sure how to word something, the chair can help you word your motions or whatever it is that you desire, but you're not quite sure how to proceed. You're definitely going to ask those questions. So the role of the member or delegate, you have a right. You need to know your organization's governing documents. You know to know your bylaws, your delegate assembly standing rules. You also need to know the principles of parliamentary procedure. And basically, you need to practice that civil discourse. Listen to each other, be respectful, wait to be recognized, follow the rules. So one of the things we're gonna today is an opportunity to become a little more familiar with Robert's rules. If you have the opportunity to read in brief, it's a great reference. And I can help. There's also some reference sheets that are part of this program that you can definitely print out if you need, or there's many options. And again, ask the chair if you aren't sure. The chair is there to help. So briefly, there's different types of motions. There's main motions. There are what we call ranking motions or precedents. This is where the precedence comes in. And those are two categories of privileged motions or subsidiary motions. There are non-ranking motions, which we consider incidental motions. And then there's motions that bring the question again before an assembly, or we kind of just say bring back motions. So maybe one way to think about this is main motions bring business before the assembly, and for the most part, the ranking motions deal with that motion or the business at hand. And then again, the delegate would need to be recognized by the chair with those kinds of motions. There's another way is where the chair might rule something out of order. And that's when, with this precedence, if we look at this ladder on the next page, it's a little bright sheet, but this is kind of the precedence. We like to look at it as a ladder. So the first, you'll see 13 ranking motions. They go from the lowest to the highest. The first 8 are what we would call subsidiary motions, and the last top 5 are called privilege motions. So if you note the arrow going on the left side, that's the order of making the motions, and it's opposite on the right. The arrow goes on the order of voting on the motions. If someone were to make a motion to amend the main motion, it would be out of order if another delegate would move to postpone indefinitely, because postpone indefinitely is lower on the ladder or stairs than amend. So once you're into amend or refer to a committee, you can't really postpone indefinitely. You could postpone to a certain time. So it's kind of how this works. Let's just go a little more briefly. Is main motion. So as I mentioned, the main motion brings business before an assembly. And it's really important that everyone knows what the motion is so that you can have a focused discussion. You can discuss it pros and cons. The minority voice is heard, but in the end, the majority voice rules. those are your basics. But I want to talk a little more about today, precise wording of a motion. And this also kind of goes to an amendment, but it's not really, when you write a motion, it's not really what you want, but how you want it, how you're going to do something. So kind of think of it as you're adopting a statement giving instructions. Um, you might want to have a motion that says, I think we should charge $50 for the dinner. Okay, that's kind of what you want, but the motion would be, I move that we set a fee of $50 per person for the dinner. And that's kind of the how it is. And if you go along that lines, the amendment is kind of the editing of it, but it might just help to think that you're really adopting a statement giving instructions. And that's again where what if you want to do something, you want to charge $50 and you're not quite sure how to word it, the chair can help you with the wording. Okay, but going up that after main motion is postpone indefinitely. And this is when an assembly doesn't want to vote on a motion. They really, it probably isn't going to come up in any of yours necessarily, because these are resolutions and motions you've vetted. But it could be where an assembly does not want to vote a motion up or down. They don't want to vote against the motion because, say, for example, it was something controversial that they don't really want to go on record saying a motion was made that was defeated, or they don't want to say it was passed, but they just really don't want to vote on it. And so that's when you would postpone it indefinitely. It is a precedence, so it has to be after the main motion before it is amended or anything. The motion itself must be seconded. It is debatable. It can't be amended. It's either yes or no, and it requires a majority vote to pass. And this kind of differs from object to consideration of the question. There is this comes from your 2023 Delegate Assembly standing rules, and this is under E, resolutions and other motions. And number 1 says, it's number 3. It says a motion to postpone indefinitely applies only to a main motion immediately available for debate. And that's just one of those statements that will also be voted on the end of the month. The next ladder up, or the next step, is amend. And this is where when you amend, you think of it as editing that statement. So I kind of mentioned that a motion is really how you're going to do something, and not really just what, but you're really giving a statement with instructions. And this, think of amend as more editing that statement, but you need to make it germane to the main motion, so it has to apply. This is not a case where you can try to introduce a new topic or new business. So it's got to be relevant. And in fact, what Roberts RONR says, an amendment must always be germane, that is closely related to or having bearing on the subject of the motion to be amended. This means that no new subject can be introduced under the pretext of being an amendment, unquote. And then you can have 2 kinds of amendments to a motion. So the first would be a primary amendment, and you would be amending the motion. The second would be a secondary amendment, which is amending the amendment. And that's as far as you go. You can't have any tertiaries. But the key is the primary amendment amends the main motion. The secondary amendment amends the primary motion. So you can't, it's not a technique to try to have 2 amendments on the same motion. So for example, well, we'll go into that. I didn't give you an example of that, but just we have an example of amendment in a little bit. But the key here is that your secondary amendment has to really address the primary amendment. And the voting order is in the reverse. So you would first vote on that secondary amendment. And if that fails or is approved, then you would vote on the primary amendment. If the secondary amendment passed, you would now vote on the primary amendment as amended. And then that can be discussed. You could have another secondary amendment offered. And if that passes or whatever the primary amendment, then you still vote on the main motion. So this is another note that's coming from your rules, the standing rules, and it's under E, also resolutions and motions. And it says, number 1, motions or amendments greater than 5 words must be provided to the secretary in writing. So if you know you're going to have an amendment, you need to, or a new motion, and it's going to be more than 5 words or 5 words or greater, you need to make sure that that is in writing and given to the secretary. And again, that just makes sure it's precise. So it gives you an idea of thoughts. And it really helps to clarify your thoughts and then is precise so people know what you're voting on. The ways to amend are basically, there's a couple, but basically you insert words. So you're going to insert a word. You can strike out a word, or you can combine the two and strike out and insert. If you add a word or words, by Robert's definition, adding means at the end. So it's like inserting words, but it means it's at the end. So when you insert or strike out, you need to be specific where you're doing that. You want, the more you can be precise and specific, the better. If you're adding a word, people assume that that is at the end of that sentence or at the end of the paragraph. There's a way also of substituting, and that would be where you would actually substitute a paragraph or text for a complete. And then even within the substitute, you can amend it by striking out. You would strike out and insert a paragraph or a text a little more than you would just do. So let's just practice. Is there anyone who would volunteer to be the chair and member A? We can all be member B. It says audience participation. Anybody want to read?
I can do chair. This is Barbara
Okay.
Monaco.
Okay. Go ahead.
I can do member A.
Thank you. Go ahead.
It is
Barbara?
moved and seconded that a green chair be purchased for the lounge. Is there any further discussion?
Madam Chair,
Member A,
I move to amend by striking out green and inserting red.
Second.
it is moved and seconded to amend by striking out green and inserting red. If adopted, the pending motion will read, a red chair be purchased for the lounge. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Member A,
And so thank you very much. I appreciate that. So there's a couple points in here, and this might seem like a pretty simplistic, but it's pretty specific what it is that's going to be struck out and inserted. And the key here is towards the middle of it, if adopted, the pending motion will read. And then they need to know that. The other part to this is, like, I didn't put this in, but they could also say the motion is on striking out green and inserting red, just so that people understand that. And again, member A is the first one to speak because it's their motion. So the chair would still have to recognize them, but they are given the first right to speak. Okay, so we kind of went a little over, we did main motion, postpone indefinitely, amend, commit or refer. It's just like if you get to a point and you're trying to amend something and it's just too complicated, you may want to just refer it back to committee or refer to another committee. And again, if you do that, it just needs to be specific what committee you're doing or forming a new committee. Postponing to a certain time or definitely is different than indefinitely. you're postponing it till after lunch or till you can get a report or something like that. You cannot postpone this beyond this assembly because there will be new delegates and it won't work. So you'd be postponing it to later of the day on that Saturday. The next one is limit or extend the limits of debate. And this truly affects your members' rights. So it requires a 2/3 vote. Some of those others only require a majority vote. But when you are talking about taking away rights, you need to have a greater vote. So your delegate assembly standing rule regarding debate is C. And there's quite a few changes from in the past, and most likely because we are now going to be in person, which is great. But two of them I just want to talk about, or three, is that debate of each main motion shall be limited to 30 minutes. And that includes secondary motions. We'll talk about that a little more. These are the same as in the past. Each speaker is allowed 2 minutes per time of speaking, and a delegate shall only speak once per motion. So on that motion, they're only allowed to speak one time and for 2 minutes. And the whole total of that motion will be limited to 30 minutes. The previous question is the next higher one, and that closes debate. It also requires a 2/3 vote because it takes away members' rights. And so you have a couple things that are in your rules already. So your 2023 Delegate Assembly Standing Rules. It's kind of different this year that in the past, your rules have limited the numbers of speakers pro and con. So they're not really limiting that. They still will be alternating pro and con. But debate is going to be limited to 30 minutes unless this is otherwise ordered by the assembly by a 2/3 vote, and that vote would be without debate. So this is the rest of C debate number 4. It might seem that that's kind of constrictive, but I was at a meeting in September where the limit to debate was 15 minutes, and it really was a good thing. I'd been at this convention back in 2019, pre-pandemic, and I swore I would never go again to this convention because it went on and on and on, and it was my first time, and I'm like, I'm never going back. Well, I was convinced to go back, and I went back, and having the limit of debate to only 15 minutes, we actually got through almost all of the bylaw changes this time, and it was very effective. As a side note, it was the National Association of Parliamentarians, and I think that's why they really needed this rule. But next year, I'm bringing my bingo card to play bingo for all the different motions that were actually introduced. But I think that this is going to be a good one. Debate is limited to 30 minutes. However, it can go less. So if you get to a point where there's no one speaking on a different side, let's say everyone's up there and speaking for it, or they're all speaking against it or whatever, and there's really not an alternating, the chair can say, if there's no further debate, we will move to a vote. So it doesn't have to go beyond that. You probably aren't going to need previous question because you have this built in. So the previous question is just another thing that takes time because you have to have the previous question, then you have to the 2/3 vote, and it's a little more, it's more efficient to have a limit. Well, we're at a 30-minute limit. The debate is ended, and we'll move on. So that is a change, but I think you're going to really like that change. Lay on the table, probably not going to happen, but if you had a speaker that came in and you needed to interrupt business, you would just lay it on the table. And then these are the privileged motions that have a precedence. Call for orders of the day, bring you back to your agenda. You can raise a question of privilege, recess, adjourn, and fix the time to adjourn. We don't really expect anyone in the world to remember all of these. So this is one of those tables that I was talking about. If you wanted to do this, is on the far left side, this is what you would say. And then on the right is kind of like Does it need a second? Can you interrupt the speaker? Is it debatable, amendable, and what kind of vote does it need? This is more of a cliff notes or cheat sheet, but it's very helpful, and it's really important when you get up to speak to kind of have things written down or to have this there, because sometimes you forget exactly what it is you want to say. But this is one of those ways of doing it. So I want to talk a little more about the debate review post-pandemic on your standing rules. And these are all under C. I'm thinking they were posted or you will get a copy. But the first one is that delegates must be recognized by the chair. And when you get up, you need to state your name, your position, local number, and direct all comments to the chair. It's really sometimes, even today at our meeting, we kind of got where you just talk to the person speaking who might not be the chair, but you really need to go through the chair. You're going to have color-coded cards. You're going to have green cards to indicate that you want to speak in favor of something. You will have red cards if you want to speak against, and you're going to have yellow cards, which are going to indicate that you're seeking the floor for another purpose. And some examples in your rules are point of order or point of clarification or needing a clarification. And so we're going to go into, most of these are going to be where you would use your yellow cards. So the green and the red for and against are more when you're talking about those precedent or those ranked motions. Most often these are the yellow cards. They're the non-ranking motions, or what we would also call incidental motions. There are things like point of order. So when a member thinks the rules are being violated, for example, if a delegate speaks more than once or longer than 2 minutes, those are your rules. You get to speak once and you only get to speak for 2 minutes. And if someone's on 2.5 minutes and you don't want them to continue, you can raise a yellow card and the chair will recognize and you'd say point of order. Maybe you're not really sure what's going on. And then you can request for information, or you might have a parliamentary inquiry. You have the right to know what is going on. So this request to the chair, but it sort of needs to be related to the business at hand. So you would say, could Delegate C explain further, or would this motion be in order now? And the chair can help you with that. The chair will make rulings. And if you aren't sure that you think the chair made the right ruling, you can appeal the decision of the chair. And you need to have 2 delegates. This is not something just one person can do, but you would appeal and it would need to be seconded. And if you get to that, the chair would, there's a whole part on that. I don't think we had any appeals last time. But if you did, the chair would state something like, shall the decision of the chair be upheld? And if you want the decision of the chair, you would vote for it. And if you don't, you would vote against. But that also can be clarified. And if you're like, now, wait a minute, if I vote for it, am I for this or against? And so some of those wordings, that's where you ask your questions if you're not quite sure. Again, you have a right to know what's going on. So there's some others, incidental motions that are continued, like division of the question. So if you have a motion or resolution that has 2 or more parts and they could each stand separately, you could ask for division of the question so that you would be voting on one part and you would vote on another. You don't have to take it all in a whole. And sometimes you might not really have an issue with one part of the motion, but you do with another, and you could ask for division of the question. You would just stand, I move division of the question. You can have division of the assembly, and this is if you doubt the accuracy of a voice vote. You will be of electronic voting, but sometimes you aren't sure. And another part to this is like, and this happened at this last meeting, was where the chair, it was a controversial vote and the chair wanted to take it just with a raised hand. And someone moved that like they would have a electronic vote. And she then agreed, yes, let's go to that. Reconsider would be, again, something if you this is the bring back motion. All of a sudden you found something new, or you have to be the one who is voting on the prevailing side. I wanted to spend a little time with object to consideration of the question, because this was one that came up a few times last year. And again, it's one of those that it's not one that we use all very often. But again, it's similar to postpone indefinitely, but it has some differences. So one of the parts is that it can be brought up by one member, where postpone indefinitely needs to be seconded. This is when one member believes that it would do more harm for the motion to even be discussed. It has to be raised before any debate has begun or any other subsidiary motion has been stated. So they would, as soon as the chair states the motion, the member would have to object to that consideration. And I kind of use, it's called object to consideration of a question, but we don't often think of motions as questions, although Roberts does. So I am using the word motion just to kind of make it a little more consistent. A second is not needed, and it's not debatable or amendable, where you can debate the motion to postpone indefinitely. This one you can't. Someone objects, you vote it up or down. This is where it's really kind of a little more confusing. It requires a 2/3 negative vote to sustain the objection. Or so if someone moves to, they don't want to discuss it, you would need a 2/3 vote in the negative. So we're going to practice this one again. If I could have two, well, the members are pretty easy one. If I could have someone who would like to be the chair, I would love that. Any volunteers?
I'll do it.
Thank you. So I'll read the first part and then you can just read the chair part. A motion is stated and a delegate stands with a raised yellow card. I object to consideration of the motion. Okay.
The consideration of the motion is objected to. Shall the motion be considered? Those in favor of considering the motion, rise. Be seated. Those opposed to considering the motion, rise. Be seated. There are less than 2/3 opposed and the objection is not sustained. The motion will be considered. Or there are more than 2/3 opposed and the objection is sustained. The motion will not be considered.
Thank you. Do you see what I mean by it's a little confusing? But if you think of it this way, so they don't want this motion considered. It doesn't really matter how many people vote in favor of having the motion considered. And it could even be 50-50. But in order for this not to be considered, there have to be a greater number who don't want it considered. So the chair's question is, shall the motion be considered? So if you want the motion considered, you would vote yes. But if you don't want it, you would vote no. And you need to have a greater number, 2/3 or more, who say, no, I don't want it. I don't want it considered. This is, again, one of those charts. These are the chart of the non-ranking motions. Again, it's like to do this, this is what, if you want done, what you would say. So if you look at that, if you go down, I didn't pull this up, but if and then again, whether you can interrupt the speaker, if you need a second, if it's debatable, amendable, or if it's one of those that you can reconsider. So again, in the middle, it says, avoid a main motion altogether. You would say, I object to consideration of, and you could either state the motion or you could just say the motion. And that's where it goes. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions.
I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A or in the chat at this time. Jason has his hand up. Go ahead, Jason.
Thank you very much. In regards to your discussion about the 30-minute time limit, you had, I believe the chart also talked about it, even if we're in the middle of considering amendments or secondary amendments to the main motion, and we reach that 30-minute time threshold, are you saying at that time, once we reach it, we move to a vote, even though it's still a question of what the motion will be because we're still considering amendments to that time?
So that is the proposed rule. There is one part to it though, that it says that unless, so it says 30 minutes unless otherwise ordered by the assembly with a 2/3 vote. So if you were in the middle of discussing something, or someone else who wanted the discussion to go beyond the 30 minutes, and you see the timekeeper, usually I'm kind of hoping that the timekeeper is going to be a little more visible, so you can see like there's 5 minutes left, or 3 minutes left, or 1 minute left. And maybe the chair would announce we have 1 minute left. Then you would make a motion to that we would extend the limit of debate, and it would take a 2/3 vote of the assembly without debate. So it says, let me just read this again because I don't have the screen up. Debate of each motion shall be limited to 30 minutes, which does include your secondary motions, unless otherwise ordered by the assembly by a 2/3 vote without debate. So if you're in the middle and you think that you really need to talk about this longer than 30 minutes, you would move to extend this debate, and someone would second it. And then at that point, it would just be voted on. You're not going to debate extending the debate. You would just vote those in favor of extending the debate. And I would be a little specific, I'm not sure if you want to, I would like to extend the debate for 10 minutes more, or, depending on where you are in the program, but I would, if you wanted the debate to be extended, or if a delegate, not you, but if a delegate wanted the debate to be extended, I would move that we would extend the debate an additional 10 minutes. And someone would second it, and then the chair would proceed with that motion, and it would be voted up and down. So your assembly does have your rights and rules. You haven't lost any control, but it's more the majority of the people. And you might be the only person who wants to continue to debate this, where the rest of the people feel like they have their minds made up and they've heard enough and nothing else is going to sway them one way or another. And they might want to just move to dinner and vote against it, does
Thank
that
you,
answer your
Lucy.
question?
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, and then David has a question in the chat. It seems fairly straightforward, but there are a lot of rules, especially with those of us who are new to this process. Can I print these and bring the notes to ourselves? Yes, you can. So on your MAPE portal, when you log in, and after you've registered, you should have registered for Delegates Assembly, if you go into there into the meeting, on the right-hand side, it says Notes and Documents. You can click on that, and towards the bottom, items 5 are the Robert's Rules of Order, and there's also links to the bylaws and MAPE history, structure for governance. So feel free to check those out, print what you need to bring along, whatever you need to do.
And Darcy, I saw in the chat some question about those tables. I can certainly print out copies of what I had. If you can't get them off the PowerPoint, it would probably be easier and better for me to just bring out those cheat sheets.
Yeah, the cheat sheets would be great, and maybe we can have Todd and I can talk about this tomorrow when we have our DA meeting. Maybe we can have a little table for you, or have a table, put it at one of our tables, like DA planning table or something like that.
Okay.
Mark, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, yes. This is Mark Snyder, Region 3 Director, and I guess I have a follow-up question to Jason's because I was a little bit unclear. Yeah. if you are in the middle of, say, debating an amendment and you reach the time threshold and a motion to extend debate fails, then how does the vote proceed then? Are you required to vote on the amendment that was in the middle that you were in the middle of discussing, or does it go straight back to the main motion?
Mark, that is a great question. You would vote on the amendment and then you would vote on them all. So you would first vote on the amendment, and if that passed or failed, you would then vote on the main motion. So what the time limit for debate means is just there's no more discussion. The vote is separate, and I think that it doesn't say it in your rules, but I think it would be understandable depending on if you're doing a lot of electronic voting. The time for voting should not be considered part of your 30 minutes, unless you can do it very efficiently. But what my experience was, and this is kind of what we got to in that meeting, was that there were a lot of amendments, and then you voted on each one of those amendments, and they voted electronically, and the electronic part of voting took a long time. So they made a decision with, if there's no objection, and there was none, that part of voting is not part of the timekeeper. So your 30 minutes, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, if you understand what I'm saying, but the 30 minutes is just strictly the discussion on the motions or the amendments. And if you have a lot of amendments, but if your time is up and everyone is discussed and the 2/3 extension fails, you would proceed directly to a vote. You would vote on any amendments. If there are secondary amendments, then the primary amendment, then the main motion. You wouldn't continue to debate at all. That's the only part that's limited. Does that
Okay, I
answer?
have, Mark, did that answer your question? I'm assuming so. His hand's still up though. And I think this is kind of the same thing. And I'm just going to clarify that's in the chat from Tanya Rolfson. Is the discussion of every motion, including motions to amend, limited to 30 minutes, or is the deliberation on the main motion on all other motions related to the main motion limited to 30 minutes total for all?
The 30 minutes starts with a motion. So it's each motion. And that's kind of what it says. It says the 30 minutes of each main motion. So that would include, I'm not sure if I understand that, look at there. That would include the amendments to that main motion. Another main motion, the clock starts over. And you might not need 30 minutes. They might have a main motion without any amendments, and you don't have to go 30 minutes. You could be done in 10, and the chair will say, is there any more discussion? Or is there any more debate? There's no more discussion or debate. Are you ready to move to a vote? And people will say yes, does that answer it, Darcy?
Yeah, I think so. I think I understand it better. So it's the way I'm understanding it, and you can get me wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, Lucy. So we make a main motion, we deliberate, there's an amendment to the motion, and then all of this is within the 30-minute time period, correct?
Correct.
Okay, perfect.
Right.
Jamie Thibodeau says, can you explain further, when you vote on an amendment and it passes, why would you need to go back to the original motion? I think, Jamie, it's if somebody makes an amendment to the motion is what your question is. So my understanding in the way that we run our meetings at the board is we make a motion on a main topic, and then somebody wants to make, say we want to donate $500 to a strike fund for somebody that's striking, and then somebody wants to amend the motion to increase it to $1,000. You vote on the amendment, and then you have to go back to the main, which changes the main motion from $500, donating $500 to $1,000. And then that's when you go back, because the main motion's been amended. So now you're voting on the main motion as amended. So it would be, now we're voting to donate $1,000. Does that answer your question? Or did I answer that correct?
You did answer that exactly correct. And it does seem to
Okay.
be like counterintuitive, like if you've already passed the amendment, but there could be another amendment. So you have that motion as amended. Someone could still make another amendment. And so that's an opportunity. And hopefully if there aren't, yes, when you vote on the main motion, it goes back it should go fast, it should pass. But you know, there's always people who still are going to vote against it. And I don't know. That's just one of the ways Robert says you still have to go back and vote on it. So,
and there have been amendments to amendments. So just so you guys know. So Todd, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Darcy and Lucy. So I'm Todd Mackey. I'm the operations director here at MAPE, formerly the statewide treasurer, and have been to Delegate Assembly quite a few times, both in person and then virtually more recently for us. And I wanted to just jump in and say that we do have a lot of changes that we are planning for this Delegate Assembly since we're back to being in person. And the first is the microphone. If you were in person at a Delegate Assembly a long time ago, you might remember a red handkerchief and a green handkerchief microphone in the room. President Dayton would like to change that by using the cards in the proposed rules, red for and green, red against and green for, to recognize speakers for and against, and then we'll bring microphones to you where you're sitting. So that'll be a change from Delegates Assembly in the past. Also, a change is our room layout. We're planning to do a classroom style seating. So everybody who is a delegate is going to be facing the chair in the front of the room to help us decide who to bring the microphones to and who's speaking for and against and other incidental motions. The third big change then would be to voting itself, because first off, you can ask for a consensus, but if we don't get that, President Dayton is planning to ask for a voice vote. Or then if it's unclear in a voice vote, we can ask for a division of the question, which is a standing vote. So that way we can count the number of delegates for, and then the number of delegates against, which was Lucy's example in our second question, I think here, second example. And then so we are not planning to use the electronic voting mechanism this time around because we should be clear on a standing vote who is for and who is against. But then if needed and called for, we do have the option of doing a roll call vote as kind of the highest level of vote and accountability. So that's the short summary of the changes that we've got proposed. And I think the standing rules reflect all of those. So hopefully that's not too much of a shock and a surprise for folks. But we're reinventing ourselves as we get back to an in-person delegate assembly.
Todd, can I just add to that? For the division, you don't need to count that vote if you can see. So if you would only really need to count it maybe if it's 2/3, but even then you could. So if you do a voice vote and it's still not clear, you could ask for a division, or the chair can just say, the chair is not clear. Would those in favor stand? Those opposed sit down. And then if it's like, half the room or, everybody stands, you don't need to count. So the only counting vote is when it's ordered by the assembly. And so if they say, I think we need to count, or if it's too close or something like that, or if the chair is in doubt. But I just want to prove, it will take a long time if you have to count everybody every time. But if you can just look and see, you don't need to count.
And then Todd has a quick question, says, out of curiosity, how many delegates are there total? Is it 250, Todd, around there?
Suzanne, can you help us with that question?
Yeah, my record as of today, and I really hope I'm right, is 132 delegates,
And then we have a number of alternates as well.
And that's including directors, correct?
It does include the directors, yes.
Okay, perfect. And then Tanya, you have your hand up?
Yes, I had a question about the standing rules being proposals that we have to adopt. What if they are not adopted, and what's the process of that? For instance, what if someone wants to talk more than 30 minutes, have more discussion than 30 minutes? And then the second question is, if there's an ability to have electronic voting, why isn't that being done for all votes? Because that would be quick and easy.
I can take the first one if you want to take the second, Todd. The first one is standing rules can be amended before they're voted on. And most of them, the amendment is just a majority vote. There are some, but then the whole overall, you need 2/3 to pass because you are restricting some of the motion. So if you wanted to do the 30 minutes, and I will double check this for sure, but I'm thinking if you wanted to strike 30 and put 40, that would just be an amendment to it. That would just be a majority vote to switch something like that. And I will be, but then overall to approve the standing rules, they need to be 2/3. But 2/3, I mean, you need to have standing rules, or everything you do, you're going to have to vote on, and it would just take a long time. So you need to have standing rules. They have to be approved one way or another. They can be amended. And then Todd, if you want to answer the question about why.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a perfectly satisfactory answer or not, but with the changes in the room design and layout, the thought, as I understand it, is that it's faster to do a visual, like stand and rise, to see if there's a majority or a 2/3 vote is required, rather than the clickers, which takes some time to administer a vote. So I'm not sure if that's a perfectly acceptable answer or not, but that's the proposal that we've got on the floor for us.
And then Jenzub, sorry if I said your name wrong. If delegates are 280, then one for each 75 member. It looks like we have 2,100 members. No, that's not how many members we have total. I don't remember how many, but we have like, what did Susie say? 136 delegates registered.
132
Yeah.
delegates assigned is the number
Okay.
I have.
Okay. And then I don't remember how many members we have total for as a whole union.
Darcy, I see that it's just 2 o'clock, but let me jump in and say that the number of delegate spots that we have is a calculation that we did with the vice president, and the numbers are posted on the website. But it's a date. I think it's February the 1st of this year, so February 1st, 2023. So it's the member count at that time divided by 75 with no rounding up, just a truncating. But the math is there for the assignment on the number of delegates per local, if you want to go check it out.
Wonderful. Thank you, Todd, and thank you, Lucy, and thank you for everybody attending. Again, this is being recorded and should be posted on either the MAPE website or on our YouTube channel. Have a good day.
Great, thank you.